Okay, recording in progress. Hello, this is my first video in a series of video presentations under the title Masterminds of Critical Social Science Thinking. And in this video, as the title says, I want to discuss social scientists, which are the mostly quoted social sciences in the world, and thus have a major influence on how people, social scientists, create their theories. This is important because, as everybody knows, quoting in the way social sciences construct their theories about what they think, quoting is a kind of argument. So if you want to prove what you think, you quote an author. I don't want to discuss this procedure if it makes sense, but that is how social thought in the social sciences is created. And since this is the case, I want to discuss and reflect upon those theories which are mostly quoted, which have a massive influence on the way social thought is created. That means on the way social sciences think, and that means again the way they introduce social thought, what you think they think about the world. So discussing these masterminds is in that sense a relevant thing, because discussing these masterminds and what they are saying about the world has a massive influence on how social scientists think, and via the social sciences also a massive influence how people all over the world create their thought about this world. As I said, this will be a series of video presentations discussing these masterminds, and I just want to quickly give you an overview which masterminds, that is, which social scientists I will discuss in this series. The first one, and this is my video about today, is about Bourdieu. Then the second one is Joseph Stiglitz, a famous economist. Then it is Immanuel Wallerstein. I will discuss his theory about European universalism. After that is number 4. That's Ulrich Beck with his Risk Society. Then number 5 will be Clifford Geertz, an anthropologist or cultural theorist. What the distinction is, I will also discuss in this presentation about Clifford Geertz. And this will be about his essay, The Interpretation of Culture. After that, number 6, another influential, I have to correct myself, it's not an influential, it is actually the most quoted social scientist in the world. He's always the top number 1, and on all the quotation list, he's number 1. That is Michel Foucault, and I will discuss what he is saying about the relation between creating social thought and discourses. Everybody knows this theory, so everybody is quoting it, so I will discuss this. He will be my number 6. Then my number 7 will be Thomas Kuhn with his famous book titled The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, in which he discusses the relativism of natural sciences. Then, as a contribution from the discipline of psychology, I will discuss Blondel. And finally, a quite recent publication from Sanjay Seth, a book called Beyond Reason, and I'm discussing this book because this is a book in which he reflects on the epistemological basis of decolonial thinking, a thinking that dominates the way of theorizing in the what this theory calls the global south. So these are the 9 authors I want to discuss, and by discussing all these authors, one gets quite substantial insight into into thinkers which have a massive influence on how social thought is created across the world. And I have to say, you can see that from this selection, I said at the beginning, it is a series about the masterminds of critical social thought. And my selection, as you can see, represents all kind of people who are considered as being critiques of this world. Some of them, most of them, are also considered as being critiques of capitalism or Marxists or something like that. So again, my series is about critically thinking people and the influence they have on the creation of critical social thought across the world. So far my introduction. And now I want to start my discussion of Pierre Bourdieu, a famous French sociologist. And I will discuss, let me have a look. I have made some notes, and I have altogether 7 points. Let me give you quickly an overview of the 7 points I want to discuss. My first point is an introduction about Pierre Bourdieu. The introduction is about the topic what Pierre Bourdieu is quoted for, what the reputation his theory has, and as an argument from my side, the topic he is really talking about. I will say the difference of what he is quoted for and what he is really talking about very soon after giving this overview. So then my number 2 is the 3 forms of capital. That is actually the title of his book or paper I'm referring to. Sorry, it's the paper. It's called The Forms of Capital, and there are 3 forms he suggests that need to be discussed and introduced in the discussion of his topic. And the 3 forms are, I will discuss, and number 1 is what is capital, what he calls a bit tautologically, but it has a reason that he calls this economic capital. Then I will discuss in that context what is capital, what is labor for him. Then his second version of capital he introduces, that is what he is somehow famous for, the introduction of other forms of capitals, not only the economic form of capital as he phrases it, but also 2 other forms of capital, and one of that is cultural capital. So I will discuss what is cultural capital for him. Then the other form of capital he introduces next to economic and cultural capital is what he calls social capital. And after discussing these forms of capital and his concept of or theory about labor, I will discuss what is for Bourdieu the society and what is an individual in a society. Then number 5, I think, if I counted correctly, is how does he discuss and reflects on the nation state, the political power, and then I will discuss what for Bourdieu is the secret of his answers on all these questions that he raises. That is what he calls social energy, which he considered as the driving force of societies. He calls it the making of the games of society. And my last point will answer the question why Bourdieu is so attractive for critical thinkers around the world. And he's also very attractive by critiques of capitalism, by Marxists who are quoting him and consider him as often consider him as well as a Marxist. These are my 7, if I counted correctly, my 7 points. I think there are only 6, but it doesn't matter. Let me start with my first point. The title is Bourdieu, what is he famous for and what is he really reflecting about? Why do I raise this question? Apparently, I think there is a remarkable difference. And the remarkable difference I can see is this. What Bourdieu is always quoted about is that people think that he is a good a social scientist who advocated to change the situation of the poor people. As somebody who is arguing against poverty and who is arguing against capitalism, capitalists, and who is somehow taking part for the poor people. That is what he is always quoted for. If you see how people quote his paper, then they mainly refer to what he calls the social and cultural capital, actually more the social capital than the cultural capital. And that his concept of cultural capital is for the people who quote Bourdieu, an argument, a theory that supports poor people and argues that the poor people are not really poor, but they are, if one has a different concept of capital, rich people. They have a certain wealth. That is what he's quoted for. So that is somehow this concept of social capital. That is somehow what makes him famous and what people believe he is talking about. So I had a look at it because I wanted to know what is he saying about this topic. And my first surprise was that this discussion of poverty is not at all his topic. What he really thinks about is this. And since the interpretation of Bourdieu, what he is supposed to say and why people quote him and what he is really saying, since this difference is so remarkable, I want to read his introduction in which he describes what his reflections are about. Though this is a bit long quotation, but I just have to prove what I'm saying. And what I'm saying is he is not talking about poverty. He's talking about something totally else. What is he talking about? I quote him. Bourdieu. That is part of his introduction. The social world is accumulated history. And if it is not to be reduced to a discontinuous series of instantaneous mechanical equilibria between agents who are treated as interchangeable particles, one must reintroduce into the notion of capital, and with it, accumulations and its effects. Now, Bourdieu is a bit difficult to understand. I will come back to that very soon, because as you can see, he talks about the social world, and he does talk about the social world as accumulated history. So he is talking, when he's talking about the social world, he is talking about the history of mankind. And what he is discussing is what is driving mankind's history. So that's why the first sentence, the first three words are this: the social world is accumulated history. So that is what he's talking about. And then he is saying something about how this social world is constructed. What are the driving forces behind this social world? I continue reading his quotation, saying this: capital is accumulated labor in its materialized form, or its incorporated or embodied form, which, when appropriated on a private, that is, exclusive basis by agents or groups of agents, enables to appropriate social energy in the form of reified or living labor. Now, this is important. Capital is appropriated social energy in the form of reified living labor. This is what I will discuss later, what it means. So he talks about what makes the society work. And what he is saying is that capital is a category which allows to understand how societies work. Again, societies, not only capitalism. I come back to this point. And capital is enabling those who own capital to appropriate social energy in the form of reified or living labor. Please keep this in mind, because that is what he's talking about the three forms of capital. And his fundamental definition of what capital is this: the appropriation of social energy in the form of reified or living labor. And what labor is, I will also discuss. I continue reading his quotation. Capital, it is a vis in vita, a force inscribed in objective or subjective structures, but it is also a lex incita, the principle underlying the immanent regularities of the social world. Very abstract sentence. I read it again. Capital is a vis incita, that is a power, a kind of energy, that's social energy he's talking about. It's a ruling ingredient of the society, a force inscribed in objective or subjective structures, but it is also a lex incita, that is the principle underlying the immanent regularities of the social world. That is his theory. And he will explain what he means by that. It is what makes the games of society, not least the economic game, something other than simple games of change offering at every moment the possibility of a miracle. And then he starts, not coincidentally, believe it or not, he talks about roulette. I don't want to read what he's now writing in that context. In fact, after saying the social world is accumulated history, why he then suddenly starts to talk about roulette. But he does that because he thinks roulette obeys the same kind of regularities, as he phrases it, the same vis in vita and the lex incita, as it is the case for what he considers as capital, as the appropriated social energy. I read another quotation from this introduction, which is saying this: it is in fact impossible to account for the structure and functioning of the social world unless one reintroduces capital in all its forms and not solely in the form of recognized economic theory. Again, it is impossible to account for the structure and functioning of the social world unless one reintroduces capital in all its forms, and not only in the one form recognized by economic theory. So he's saying one needs, if one wants to understand, to account for the structure and functioning of the social world, one needs to introduce, to discuss, to reflect on capital in all its forms. And the three forms, as I said already, are this capital, economic theory discusses, but for accounting for the structure and functioning of the social world as a whole, one needs to introduce also what he then introduces as cultural and social capital. So this is what he is thinking about, to account for the structure and functioning of the social world. Maybe poverty plays anywhere a role. There is actually one paragraph in the context of social capital, I come back to that point, where he discusses that, but he's not talking about poverty. It's not his topic. He is a sociologist. And as a sociologist, he wants to understand how societies work, what their structure is, and how they are functioning. Now, this is in fact a bit bizarre. It's quite difficult to understand. It is difficult to understand because in this abstraction, how societies as such work is a bit confusing, because he says, in order to understand how societies as such across history work, you have to introduce three forms of capital and not only one. That is confusing because everybody, including myself, of course, believe that if he talks about capital and if he wants to explain the society in which he uses the categories capital, he talks about capitalism. No, that's not the case. He talks also about capitalism. And he talks also about capitalism because what he is talking about is the functioning of the social world as such. And for him, capital, one might believe, is the form of wealth that characterizes a particular society system, capitalism. That is not at all the case for Bourdieu. So the difficulty to understand this theory is that he makes a theory about the society as such. How, and that's why he starts with that introduction sentence. He says, the social world is accumulated history. So he talks about the accumulated history. And in this accumulated history, for Bourdieu, capital is something that does not explain capitalism, but for him explains the history of the social world and how the social world is structured and functioning across history. To give you an example, when he talks about this problem, the account for the structure and functioning of the social world, I want to read a quotation from you, which is for me, maybe for you as well, so irritating. In fact, for him, a feudal subject, the noble, is the personification of a particular form of capital. Yes, that is quite confusing. The quotation is this: the noble is the group personified. He bears the name of the group to which he gives his name. And then he talks about Shakespeare and Cleopatra and Egypt and Greece and the Epirus and the Pyrrhus and so on. So he's talking about feudal society. He's talking about the ancient societies in Greece and Egypt and so on. And he considers the noble as a representation, a subjective representation, the personification of a particular type of capital. In this case, as a personification of social capital. But this is how Bourdieu thinks, and you have to understand this paper, it's a paper written by a sociologist. And as you know, if you're a little bit familiar about sociology, this is the way how sociology is thinking about the society today as a mere variation of how societies work as such. The way in which sociology articulates this, that they are not talking about capitalism, but that they are talking about capitalism as a variation of the structure and functioning of the social world as such. The way they are doing is that they discuss everything as a matter of modernity. And modernity is a wonderful expression that says what what we are living in today is modernity, and modernity wants to say this is a variation, the today's variation of the structure and functioning of societies across the world. And modernity says we are now living in the most updated version of this structure and functioning of the social world. In fact, if you look at how sociologists not only name what they think about modernity, but what the subject that constitutes sociological thinking is, you find exactly the same thing. They all start from relation, as they call it, between individual and society. And this is the abstraction from all particular society systems, from the society system of capitalism or feudalism, any, but sociologists talk about the functioning of the society as such. And they raise this question about how do societies function, because they consider this relation between individual and society as the constitutive element for any society. The relation of individual and society, and this relation, how it is structured and functioning, that is what makes the social world work or functioning. This relation, how it is constructed. So this is what you have to bear in mind if you read such an article, that Bourdieu is thinking about this topic, accounting for the structure and functioning of the social world, this abstraction. Now, I don't want to argue at this place about this abstraction, but one thing is clear. Well, let's see if you think there is something that shapes, that structures, to use that sociological term, how societies work, how they are, what they are. If you think you can find that beyond the particularity that really rules a society, a particularity that lies behind all the very particular society system specific ways of organizing a society. For example, capitalism, as the name says, is a society ruled by the rationale of capital. Feudalism, obviously, is a society that is not ruled by the rationale of capital. It is not a society in which the relations, human relations, organized via the exchange of money in everything they do. So that is in this society, the way social relations are constructed, ruled and what are the objectives imposed into the society by this. If you think there is something that rules the society, the particular form of a society, capitalism, by the rationale of capital, and you then say, no, there is something behind what rules capital that rules capitalism. That is a bit a contradictory assumption, but that is what sociologists do. It is an abstraction from what rules particular forms of society, but it argues that this abstraction from what a society is ruled, the rationale of capitalism, then you have a rationale that lies behind the rationale that rules a society. And that is a kind of little contradiction. But let's see what he is then saying. What rules the rationale that rules a particular society system rules the society as such across all the different society systems. Well, it's obvious this must be an abstraction from all the rationals ruling particular societies. And this already means that this abstraction, abstracting from what rules a particular society, is an abstraction, let me say it carefully, that is quite in danger to become meaningless. An abstraction which has no content anymore. Let's see what the content is. The content is his insistence on not only one form, but on three forms of capital. And then I read why he thinks we need three forms of capital to understand how societies as such are ruled beyond the rationale by which they are ruled. I read a quotation. Again, I'm reading a quotation more than I usually do, because I just want to make you familiar with what this guy is really saying, because he is quoted always for something totally else. That's why I'm sort of getting a little bit on your nerves with these quotations, and they are hard to understand. Capital. Capital can present itself in three fundamental guises: as economic capital, which is immediately and directly convertible into money and may be institutionalized in the forms of property rights. Secondly, as cultural capital, which is convertible on certain conditions into economic capital and may be institutionalized in the forms of educational qualifications. Thirdly, and as social capital made up of social obligations, in brackets, connections. Yes, that's what he's writing. Connections. I have good connections. Hello, can you do something for me? I have good connections. Social capital. Sorry. Connections in brackets. Which is convertible in certain conditions into economic capital and may be institutionalized in the forms of a title of nobility. Again, you see, he's talking about capital as structuring the social world. And since capital, though it never existed in Egypt or anything, but at least not as what you think capital is. But if you will notice soon what capital for Bourdieu is, you will understand why he finds also capital across all the society in which there was at least not this capital you think is capital. Institutionalized capital, social capital, may be institutionalized, now listen, in the forms of a title of nobility. The princess is an institutionalized form of social capital. Again, the reason for this is that he talks about categories. He takes from capitalism, capital. But when he talks about capital he talks about, to repeat that, to refer to this first argument, a vis incita, and something behind, in everything, that rules the structure, the functioning of the social world as such. That's why in his reflections you always find people from societies like feudalism as representations of his forms of capital. So I continue. What he's saying, where he's talking about, and what the relation between his three forms of capital and the explanation, his theory about the how societies structure and functioning, the social world is structured and functioning, how this is related. I quote, and the structure of the distribution of the different types and subtypes of capital at a given moment in time represents the immanent structure of the social world. So the social world, don't forget this. The social world is represented by the subtypes of capital and how they are related in a given moment in time. That represents the immanent structure of the social world. That means the set of constraints inscribed in the very reality of that world, which govern its functioning in a durable way, determining the chances of success of practices. So now, so far, that is what I quoted in order to say, what is this guy talking about? What is he reflecting about? It is how his three forms of capital, not only one, how these three forms of capital allow to understand, and only these three forms of capital allow to understand the functioning and the structure of the social world. So then let's try to understand how this theory thinks, what this theory is saying about how these three forms of capital, as he phrases it, structure the social world. You might find this idea crazy. I admit I also find it crazy to find something that structures the social world beyond the rationality of a particular society system, but that is what he's doing. And that is, sorry to say, that is what sociology is about. As I said, that is articulated in that notion of modernity already. So, but let's just follow his thought and see how he is then explaining this vis incita and the lex incita, the powers, the ingredients, or however you call the elementary substance, allowing to understand how societies and are structured and are functioning. To do this, to understand this, what he is saying is you firstly have to understand what is capital. And then to discuss, and then you have to understand his three forms of capital. So what is capital in general? I read another quotation. Capital is accumulated labor in its materialized form or its incorporated, embodied form, which, when appropriated on a private, that is exclusive basis by agents or groups of agents, enables them to appropriate social energy in the form of reified or living labor. So again, I know I quoted this quotation already, but I have to quote it here again because this is how he explains what capital is. So capital is, again, a force incita that makes the societies structured and functioning across history. And what capital is the reification of social energy appropriated by a capitalist. So what does this mean? Capital is the appropriation of social energy. It means that capital, the result of work, the production of the wealth of societies, keep that in mind again. Societies before capitalism did not have that concept of producing wealth as kind of particular industrial complex, or how you call that, right? They were agricultural societies, and it was in fact capitalism which created that wealth via the particular way of organizing work for the production of all these things. For Bourdieu, the sort of industry, or they call it, the market economy and its industry, for Bourdieu, this is only a variation which always happened across history already of the appropriation of social energy in the form of reified or living labor. So what does this mean? If capital is the appropriation of social energy, then the wealth of societies for Bourdieu are not the material products of labor. Cars, toothbrush, soap, food, weapons, everything that is produced as capital, sold as capital, creating the wealth counted in money. That's why it's called capital, abstracted from the particular quality of the things, because it all, after all, only matters as representing a certain amount of money for the accumulation of capital. This accumulation of wealth in the form of accumulated wealth counted in units of money for Bourdieu is something totally else. If capital is the accumulation of and appropriation of social energy, then the wealth of any society is the sociality it creates. The wealth for Bourdieu called capital is a variation of accumulated sociality. It's the being togetherness, if you want, that is the wealth of any society across all the different society systems, if, as he does, you define capital as the appropriation not of any kind of particular goods, but if all these goods for Bourdieu are nothing else but representations of the results of work, and all the results of work, capital is defined as the accumulation of social energy. So what you accumulate when you accumulate capital for Bourdieu is social relations. Social energy results in the relatedness of people. You might find that a bit hard to understand, but that is what he's saying. So what it is this idea of capital as an incorporation of sociality means that what societies do is to conceptualize whatever they do, whatever they produce, as not to pursue any particular interest people have, whatever, buying a bicycle, driving a bicycle, producing a bicycle, a car, a pan, a fridge, a swimming pool, a weapon, is not the particular use, the particular way of using things, but everything you use. For Bourdieu, in this concept of the production of capital as the production of social energy, is nothing but the creation of relatedness. And you see, behind this idea, there is this assumption constituting sociological thinking so much. They really raise the question, how come that people come together, that they create sociality? And Bourdieu is saying, behind everything they do, there is nothing that is ruling what they're doing towards this creation of sociality. If you go to the if you go to a supermarket, if you buy tomatoes, if you produce tomatoes, it is all about the creation of sociology via the production, the incorporation of sociality, of this social energy in all the products of any human activity. This is what makes societies, and as societies also the society of capitalism, work, functioning. So for Bourdieu, this society of capitalism and its rationale, with all kinds of conflicting interests, competing people, instrumentalizing each other for interests which are excluding each other. To give the most simple example, the guy goes to the factory to earn a lot of money in order to buy things. The capitalist says, no, I cannot pay you too much, because if I pay you so much, my profit is too low. And if my profit is too low, my mission to create economic growth, to create more profit, is a question. So I cannot pay you so much. All these things are, by Bourdieu, abstracted into the very same things that both the workers and the capitalists are doing the same. They are both accumulating relatedness. And this relatedness, as Bourdieu is saying, is then creating the sociality of people. In other words, he presents a society consisting of these conflicting interests as a society that, thanks to his definition of capital as nothing else but incorporations of social energy, that they are all working, they're functioning. So capital, in his interpretation of what capital is, an incorporation of social energy, gets the compliment from Bourdieu that it is functioning. It works, he says, a miracle. So he attributes to a society system which consists of all kinds of conflicting interests the what do you say, appreciation that he finds with his interpretation that everything is reification of social energy, that it functions. It works very well. So in other words, to add an idea, capital, a money, a society in which all kind of life agendas are only possible to be carried out via the possession of money, and the conflicting interests included in that, and the abstractions, the real abstractions everybody has to make if you want to pursue any life agenda, any life aim. The abstraction you have to make that you say, no, I can only get a bicycle if I have enough money, and if I don't have enough money, I cannot buy anything. I cannot even exist. So the abstraction from the life interest, including the interest to only exist, to survive, and the things you need to survive in this society in which the capitalist rational rules living, is made a condition, and the condition is, yeah, you can exist, but only if you own money. In Bourdieu's interpretation of what money, capital is, this abstraction replaced by the abstraction of everything is done with the intention to create a relation to each other, is a successful operation that brings together individuals to a society, that makes individuals from individuals social relations, as a society, a relatedness. So in his view, the conflicting interests, the abstractions from the material interests, which capitalism is, for Bourdieu, is a proof that since he defines all these activities as incorporations, reifications of social energy, let's be together. I go to the factory in order to meet a worker or a capitalist. All these activities are for Bourdieu only done in order to create this togetherness. And since this happens for him, the society in which he finds this all happens for this purpose, for the articulation of social energy, the society happens, functions, it works. That is the compliment capitalism, like any society, gets from Bourdieu. Capitalism is a way making societies structured and work. They function. Thanks to his idea that everything that is done in this society, the creation of capital, is about nothing else, about exactly this, about the creation of sociality. Now, my next point. What is then labor? Well, it has already been said. Labor is the reification of social energy, the objectivation of social energy represented in the products of work. In that sense, an accumulation of social energy. That is an interesting interpretation of what you do when you work in a company. I don't know what you do. You know, you are in a car company, you put the wheels on the car, you put the color on the car, or if you work in a fish industry, you put the fish into any kind of tins. And if you are working in a computer industry, I don't know, you are welding all these wires. Well, that's all done by computers in the meantime and so on. But whatever you do in a company, whatever you do there, for Bourdieu, it is nothing else but the reification of social energy. You are social. You are related to others. That is what he says when you are putting any screws into an aircraft. When you're working in Airbus industry or whatever, that's how he sees it. So that is what is labor. Now, if labor is this, the reification of social energy, then it has, in fact, a very interesting power. It is the real means to create, via its articulation, the execution of social energy, it creates the society. So let's have a look how Bourdieu describes this process of the creation of social energy via labor. And now it becomes a little bit, a little bit too much, because it's now, well, inevitably sliding away this abstraction into the world where you cannot distinguish Christian thinking from sociological thinking anymore. In fact, I read a quotation. Labor is the no, this is not quotation. Right? Labor is, as he phrases it, the transubstantiation of social energy into its products. Capital defined as the appropriation of social energy. I must confess, I didn't know what is transubstantiation. And of course, this shows not knowing what transubstantiation means. Does anybody know that? I didn't. I had to look it up. And what do you do when you want to know anything today? You go to Wikipedia. So I looked it up and I found this definition of what transubstantiation. I quote from Wikipedia. Transubstantiation, Latin, transubstantatio, transubstantiatio, Greek. Can I read it? I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with the Greek. Metuosiosis. Sounds a bit like metaformation. Maybe, I don't know. So transubstantiation is, according to the teaching of the Catholic Church, the change of the whole substance of bread into the substance of the body of Christ, and the whole substance of wine into the substance of the blood of Christ. Yes. This is the term the scientific thinker, considered as a Marxist, is using. Transubstantiation. In other words, this guy mobilizes Catholic theories, Catholic thinking, in order to explain what labor is. It is the explanation of a sociologist who appreciates to be misunderstood as a Marxist, and as a theorist and a thinker who is appreciated by all kinds of critiques of capitalism around the world, as arguing against poverty, who is telling us this about labor. For Bourdieu's sociology, working as a proletarian is a kind of sacred act. The proletarian is a kind of high priest who celebrates the spinning of a self-worshipping sociological thinker elevated to the status of sainthood. Why that? Because the worker is the one who creates the social energy. He is the one who transforms the final objectives of societies, their structure and their functioning. He is the one with his work who transforms with his work somehow the substance of the body, not of Christ, but the body of Bourdieu, the social energy, into the whole substance, not of wine, and not into the blood of Christ, but into the functioning of societies. So the proletarian is a kind of holy figure, and his work is a holy act, creating, transforming with his labor social energy into sociality. What the proletarian is doing is this. What you might consider as the exploitation of labor, the appropriation of its product by the capitalists. For Bourdieu, labor is made a holy act as the creation of the substance of sociality, the holy act creating the substance, the social energy that makes from mere individualized humans a sociality. And with this celebration of creating sociality as a holy act, I felt reminded of the status of the vision, the definition, the concept of what in the German language Volk has. Volk as the final objective of humans. I felt a little bit reminded of that. The appreciation of sociality to an extent that this is the one and only thing humans, individuals are aiming at, presents the sociality, the Volk, as the final aim of humans. And that reminds me, in fact, a little bit of the fascist concept of Volk as a way in which somebody who is considered as being a Marxist, somebody who is considered as arguing against poverty, is telling us what work is for him. Now I come to my next point, to his additional forms of capital, after saying something what he is telling us about capital and what he's telling about labor as the power, the force creating capital, what capital is and what labor is, this holy act, capital as the reification of social energy, and then labor as the holy act to transform this social energy into the body of the blood of Christ, which is the products of capitalism, which is the blood of the societies. Again, not capitalism, right? We're talking here always about societies as such. And yes, if you consider, if you interpret capital as nothing else but the reification of social energy, then anything that is a product of work is capital, in the sense that is the reification of social energy. And with this abstraction, you can say, yeah, that does not only happen in capitalism, that happens at any time across history when anybody produces anything. Now, let's go to his other forms of capital, to cultural capital, and then to social capital. Again, I read a quotation. in which he explains what is cultural capital. Cultural capital, I quote, cultural capital can exist in three forms. In the embodied state, that is in form of long-lasting dispositions of the mind and body. In the objectified state, in the forms of cultural goods, pictures, books, dictionaries, instruments, machines, and that's important, etc. You always find when he is somehow saying something, what he is talking about, when he talks about cultural capital, you always find this enumeration. Pictures, books, dictionaries, instruments, machines, etc. And this etc. is important because it indicates it doesn't matter. You can also phrase it, so sorry to say it in a bit nasty way, it's all the same shit. It doesn't matter what it is. It's irrelevant. It is all the same, he always wants to say. That's why at any end of enumeration, he's telling us in his particular etc. It doesn't matter. Machines, instruments, dictionaries, that's all the same. So which are the trace or realization of theories or critiques of these theories, problematics, etc. So theories, critiques of theories, all the same, etc. Like a machine, like instrument, like a dictionary. And in the institutionalized state, the institutionalized state of cultural capital, a form of objectivation which must be set apart because, as will be seen in the case of educational qualifications, so it's also cultural capital, okay? It confers entirely original properties on the cultural capital, which it is presumed to guarantee. So educational qualifications, machines, pictures, paintings, critiques of theories, making theories, etc. It is all the same. It's all cultural capital. What does it mean? For Bourdieu, cultural capital, that is all products of intellectual activities, of reason, of feeling, of human's mind, all are nothing but the very same objectifications of social energy. Of course, if cultural capital is a variation of capital, then cultural capital is nothing else but capital. There is substantially no difference. It has only different reifications. The reifications here he's talking about are cultural, is called cultural capital, are reifications resulting from, as I call it, products of human's mind, of feeling, of theories, etc., etc., are all nothing but the very same objectification of social energy, products of a kind of social fanatism that dissolves every form of individual objectives, of individual activities, into nothing else but the need, the idea, the desire to objectify itself in sociality. So if you write a book, you know what you do? You aim at sociality. So sociality. If you create a machine, you want to be social. If you write a poem, you want to be social. What is the abstraction here? Of course, in any of these activities, there is the intention. If you write a book, you write it for others to read. If you produce a machine, you create a machine producing things others buy. But making the objective of all this into nothing else but into sociality as such, this abstracts from anything you do and inserts into anything you do nothing else but what Bourdieu considers as his big mystery. How do societies create sociality? And what he's then doing is that he says, okay, I interpret everything as being nothing else but aiming at sociality, then my mystery, my question has been answered: how societies are structured and how societies function. Well, that is a nice tautology. If you interpret everything what people do as nothing else at aiming at sociality, well, then everything people do is resulting in sociality. Your question is answered. But I have to say, this is theoretically absurd, but this absurd theory transports certain ideas. And I have to say, again, as I already said about capital and labor, with its holy mission to be somehow nothing else but creating sociality, the social, the folk, this affinity with fascist ideas that humans, citizens, are nothing else but a member of the society and all they're doing is for the sake of the folk. In the cultural capital, it has again a similarity. The cultural capital as well contains a really fascist idea. I'm using this category very carefully because I know fascism is considered as a mere insult. If you find something the most awful of the most awful thing, you call it fascist. I'm not using that category here in that way. I'm using it in a way what fascism really means. And it means the idea to consider the belongingness to a society, to a folk, as the one and only important and relevant objective of human's life, of people's life. That's what the fascists were saying. And that is what actually Bourdieu is very closely also saying. For Bourdieu, the individual human being and the products of his intellectual activities he calls cultural capital. Cultural products dissolve into nothing but objectifications of sociality through the transubstantiation of his intellectual activities into sociality. So everything humans do here with their mind is, according to Bourdieu, nothing else but objectifications of social energy aiming at the folk, at the sociality, at the being part of a society. What is social capital? I read again a quotation. And again, I get on your nerves with reading these quotations because I insist. I want you to read, to know what this guy is really writing, and not only knowing Bourdieu from people who started to quote him, and then what has been quoted has been spread across the world as what Bourdieu is saying. And that was what I said at the beginning. He is somebody who is advocating, arguing for the sake of the poor. Did you find anything about this like this? Yes, you find anything like that. But here, the poverty, those who have to earn their income via work and are exploited by capitalists, appropriating the products of their work and paying them a salary. Did you hear anything about that? Yes, you heard anything about that. For him, it is all this holy activity creating sociality. That is what he's saying about labor, and that's what he's saying about capital, etc., etc. Now, what is he saying about social capital? Well, you can imagine what social capital is. Let's read it. Social capital is the aggregate of the cultural or potential resources which are linked to the possession of a durable network or more or less institutionalized relationships of mutual acquaintance and recognition. Or in other words, to a membership in a group. which provides each of its members with the backing of the collectively owned capital. The capital here is having the connections, right, as he said. A credential which entitles them to credit in the various senses of the word. Yeah, so, but that's what he writes. The volume of social capital possessed by a given agent thus depends on the size of the network connections he can effectively mobilize and on the volume of the capital, economic, cultural, symbolic possessed in his own right by each of those to whom it's connected. Yeah, one tautology after another. If cultural capital is being part of the network, then you know how much capital you have depends on the how many people you know and how much you can mobilize the connections to and so on and so on. And of course, the volume of the capital consists of the number of people you know, and so on. My goodness. In other words, I don't let you go. In other words, the network of relationships is the product of investment strategies. Did you know that? I will talk about that. Individual or collective, consciously or unconsciously aimed at establishing or reproducing social relationships that are directly usable in the short or long term. That is a transforming contingent relations such as those. Now, again, we find this enumeration. Neighborhood, the workplace, you mean the colleagues working next to you, the workplace, kinship, into relationships that are at once necessary and elective, implying durable obligations, subjectivity felt. Again, feelings of gratitude, respect, friendship, etc. Again, etc. Or institutional guarantee rights. I come back to this point because this is somehow making a little bit a kind of excursion towards guaranteed rights to what the state for this man is. So what is social capital? Yeah, it's a bit exhausting, but I insist, I really want people to understand what this guy is writing and saying. Social capital is the dissolution of any relations between individuals as nothing but creating sociality for the sake of accumulating instruments for gaining sociality. And this is hard. Sociality as the real objective of humans, the individuals, whatever they do in any kind of relations, in a family, with a friend, in a football club, if you go to a job, you meet your colleagues, and so on and on and on. It's all about nothing else but wanting to be part of the folk. It is, I want to add this, I could say much more, but one thing I want to say is, it is what happens in social relations in these citizen societies. What happens there inevitably is that the instrumentalization of human relations, the instrumentalizations with others, with other humans, for reaching one's own objectives at the cost of others, using another person, the social contacts you have to reach your own aims at the costs of the others. This instrumental relation between people. I have good relations. I can ask my boss if he can do that. I have good relations to this one. Can you help me to achieve my problems? Next time I will also help you. this kind of not very nice social relations, using the other ones for pursuing your own interests, this relation, typical for these citizen societies, is what Bourdieu presents as the real wealth of sociality. I come to my fourth point. I want to somehow summarize what is the concept of individuals and of society in this theory. What is it? The real abstraction made by capital, by capitalism, that is the society of exclusive conflicting interests and the social relations are by Bourdieu ennobled towards the celebration of a kind of, yes, socialism. Capitalism, these competitive, conflicting society relations, for Bourdieu is what makes society, sociality, and it makes work. It's fine, it's wonderful. That is the ingredient. Capital, interpreted as nothing else but the articulation, the making of social energy, is creating sociality. The folk, wonderful. The instrumentalization of people in their social relations, for Bourdieu, that is a way you create sociality. It's kind of socialism. The real abstractions from the material interests in money-related social relations, in which you always have to use the interest of the other in order to get money for the sake of achieving any life and any material interest. You know, you want to buy something, you always have to provide money, and the conflicts really involved in this, the abstractions you have to make from what you really want, denying that you want the bicycle, you have to say, no, I'm only interested in paying you some money, of course, because you must make your business. This relation, interpreted as nothing but the execution of social energy for the mission of humans to create sociology, this interpretation of sociology is what makes poor people wealthy. It defines capitalist wealth as the wealth of social relations. And if you define capitalist as the wealth of social relations, then social relations, though nobody can get anything for that in the reality of capitalist societies, in which only counts in the money in this society what can be paid by money. For being a member, let's say, of a football club, members of such social relations are for Bourdieu the real wealth holders, meaning those who own nothing, those who therefore must go to work for the growth of the wealth of the others, the capitalists, those who nothing own, those nothing owning workers are, thanks to being a member of a working class, a wonderful social relation, being a member of a working class. It is not the necessity that you have to go to work. It is a wealth to be a member of a working class because it's a social relation, meaning you are a member of network of connections, as he phrases it. These are then, of course, the real capitalists, the wealthy people. given one defines capital as the reification of social energy. And that's what he's defining. The abstractions from the interests of capitalist subjects forced upon them through the regime of money, Bourdieu translates into successful acts of the constitution of social relations. The rationality of the negation of any material needs are translated in his theory into constituting sociality. The negation of material interests, I repeat this, of subjects, of citizen societies imposed on the citizens through their monetary relations. You have to always say, no, I don't care about what you want. I'm only interested in your money. For Bourdieu, is the production of jointly pursued communality, the demand of people for being social. Thus, the society is presented as the real objective of humans. And capitalism, for him, in this concept of capital, is the successful way to become a folk. The individuals in this theory are nothing but functionaries for the functioning of the society. Everything is dissolved in every activities of individuals, every mind product, any activity, any social relations is social capital, the other one is cultural capital, so that what individuals do, whatever they do, is nothing but a contribution to the functioning of the society. The similarity to the concept of folk is this. In this concept, citizens are the servants of their national society. The society is the final aim, the final objective of humans. And if there is a difference between what Bourdieu is saying about what humans are aiming at, find it out by yourself. I almost come to the end. As you could see from my quotations, the nation state, that is the representation of the sociality of capitalist societies, the political body which represents what this society does and what it wants and what it kind of objective it has, or it has to have, because it is this body who imposes these objectives on the society. This political body doesn't exist in Bourdieu's theory. It exists here and there in the concept of cultural and social capital. You know, cultural capital, he mentioned education as one of his etceteras. And in the social capital, he mentioned kind of, networks, representatives of these networks, the chef, the boss of the football club, for example. These cultural and social capitals are at certain, in certain variations, certified. And the nation state, in fact, in Bourdieu's theory, appears as this certification agency and nothing else. There is no power relation between citizens and the nation state. There is no decision monopole that the nation state is the one that you have to do what you have to do. The implementation of capital, the rules of capitalism, the value of money, everything that is done, all the things regulating humans' life in these societies, imposed to the people, enforced on them with the power monopoly of the nation state, decided by the nation state, by nobody else, and the citizens have to do it if they want to pursue their life aims. They have to join the laws the state imposes, and if you break the laws, it has a power monopoly to force you to do it. Nothing, not a word by that. The state is a certification agency in Bourdieu's theory. Let me put that in bracket. Well, he is a sociologist. And for sociology, nation states, oh, that's the business of political theory. No clue about that. But of course, in that theory he creates about these three forms of capital, the nation state does appear. But it appears, in fact, as this mere agency certifying his variations of social and cultural capital. So in other words, though the nation state hardly appears, it appears in one respect. It appears as a service agency for the needs of the citizens. Political theory couldn't have phrased it in a more apologetic way. The nation state as a service for the citizens. If you ask a politician, what is the nation state? He would tell you this: the nation state is a service for the citizens. That is how this critical Marxist sociologist sees it as well. I come to my last point before answering the question, what makes then Bourdieu so attractive for critical thinkers, including critiques of capitalism? Before doing that, I want to say a little bit about this secret power that somehow constitutes, rules, and makes societies as such functioning. This, what he calls vis incita, which is also a lex incita, this social energy, making, to quote him, making the games of society. What is this, the social energy? It is, first of all, a mysterious force. Mysterious because, firstly, it lies beyond any human act and will, but nevertheless miraculously directs any will, and because every content of these human activities is taken from it beyond what they really are and what they want, it is a contentless force. This energy driving any human activities towards being social, that is supposed to ultimately constitute all human thought and action. So it is the absurd idea that this contentless, meaningless abstraction is, after all, directing people to what they do. Everything they do is everything they do. All their, therefore called etceteras, are nothing but executions of social energy. A kind of driving force, a deeper will that lies beyond the human will and which determines, though, what all humans are really aiming at. If you write a book, if you create a machine, if you go on holidays, if you go to a football club, according to Bourdieu, it is all the same, and it is all behind you, making you what you do. Absurd. It is actually nothing but fulfilling what the mystery for sociology is. For sociology, the question is, how do societies exist? How is sociality created? And the secret is humans do nothing else but creating sociality, whatever they do. That is why he interpreted everything into nothing else but into the objective to create sociality. So his question is answered thanks to what he imposes into everything everybody is doing. Great idea, Mr. Bourdieu. It is a kind of divine power, divine, I don't know, divine power, I think divine power, whose entire content is the fulfillment of the sociological mystery, answering the riddle invented by sociological thinking with its naturalized opposition of individual and society, implanted into the nature of society as to how society then, though functions. Though they are all individuals, they create sociality via executing social energy. A kind of divine power that solves this invented sociological riddle. How does a society which consists of individuals, which is actually only a riddle of capitalist societies, but they don't want to know about this because, you know, they say, no, we think about humans and sociality as such. So that's why they don't realize that this individual and society is an image only capitalist society, citizen societies create for them, but they're not interested in that because they want to think about things as such. However, it is a theory at the expense of all the contents of human activity, which is why these contents must all be redefined, as with Bourdieu, as nothing other than all incorporations of this godlike force. So that's why reading this paper is really demanding, because the paper is somehow so bloody boring, because it consists of nothing else but interpreting everything. He is somehow very coincidentally collecting, you know, as said, from a football club, it's a family and so on. Everything must be interpreted by him as nothing else but execution of social energy. My God, how boring. Really, you must read that paper. I admit it is demanding, because you find everywhere the same tautological thing. But that is what this guy is really doing, and that is how he's writing his paper. That's why it isn't finished with the introduction, where he already said everything is incorporation of social energy. But what he's doing in his article is instead then interpreting, telling everything, saying everything, why everything is nothing but this. My goodness, but it's worth reading it. So, social energy is therefore a force at work in people which, through the assignment of the adjective social, so it's this energy, you know, that is the power, the making of something. That's what energy is. It's an activity. But you cannot only say there is activity going on. In order to direct this activity to what you want to direct it, you have to give it an adjective. And the adjective of this energy is social. And by giving it the adjective of social, it gets the attribute of realizing the mission that sociological thinking needs to answer its false question, because it is abstracted from all content about what creates and maintains sociality. Of course, you could raise the question, you know, how do capitalist societies work? But that's what they don't want. Because implicitly, of course, they are a critique of Marx theory, who is explaining what the rationale of capitalism is. But sociologists want to understand the social as such. And that's why this question, let's have a look at capitalism, how it works, is not a possibility for them. That's why, on the other hand, capital is only a variation of what makes societies work. Yeah, my goodness, what makes society work? You can say, because everybody wants to be a member of a society. What a wonderful tautology. And what is then society? It also has to be said. Society is then the sheer being together of individuals for the purpose of being together. A collective in which no one knows what the other wants and does not need to know what the other wants. In other words, something that cannot be distinguished from individuals. You don't know anymore if you don't know what the other wants and is doing and what kind of objectives it has, if it's all irrelevant, because the only thing you're interested in is being together. But if that is what you're aiming at, you don't know anymore if you are together or if you are alone. So this is a concept of sociality that cannot be distinguished from individuals in the mere accumulation of individuals. Individuals without any purpose, why they get together with another one. If that is all abstracted, then, sorry, but then the sociality cannot be distinguished anymore from the individual people. So it ends up this mystery of what constitutes sociality, what is the structure and what is the functioning of sociality. It ends up that this theory cannot distinguish anymore between individuals and society. Absurd, but that is the irony. So I come to my last point. My last point, as I already said, is why on earth is this guy with all his neighborhood to some fascist concepts of folk, why is this guy so attractive for critical thinkers, including critiques of capitalism? There must be a certain intellectual neighborhood between Bourdieu, if you appreciate this theory I just explained and went through, if you consider this as a critique of capitalism. In fact, it is their celebration of what they see, these critiques, as a practiced collectivism, the communality of workers they practice while producing anything, as well as the necessity of workers to be only able to jointly fight for the material interest, their solidarity, which these Marx interpretations see as the anticipation of their vision of a concept of sociality beyond the society of competing individuals. They see as a kind of this, the necessity of coming together to fight for their interests, the solidarity of workers. They see as a predecessor of a concept of socialism in which the social is considered as the true materialism. This is what they sympathize with, that they say the capitalist materialism aiming at capital, they critique as a critique of any materialism. That is their mistake. And that is why critiquing any materialism, the social relations, solidarity, for example, or just the collectivity of people working together in the factory, the workers, is for them, this being together is for them the true materialism, because it's immaterial. That is where they find their sympathy for Bourdieu's abstractions. It is this negation of pursuing the material life interests of humans as competing individuals, this negation that creates this ideal of humans pursuing sociality, chica, as their life interest. Sociality as what humans are aiming at. Thus also omitting their materialism, the materialism of people, which makes Bourdieu's Catholic-inspired theory about the functioning of the social world attractive for thinkers in the tradition of the historical materialism, seeing their sociality, their sociality as their real wealth. A final point. as you might remember, for the historical materialism and its practiced society model, the society model of socialism in the Soviet Union, celebrated this distancing, this interpretation of sociality, of being together, the being together of the workers and of the peasants in the celebration of their workers and peasant state. This is the idea people have and have to have in mind if they sympathize, find anything, sympathize with Bourdieu's theories, find anything they find attractive. It is this false abstraction from material life interest as a critique of the particular material life interests of capitalism, accumulating abstract capital and criticizing this with a critique of any materialism, and therefore celebrating a social aim which abstracts from any materialism, sociality as such. This is where these critical thinkers sympathize, or where the sympathy originates from. That's all.